Hello, Windward, and welcome to the Pencils Down podcast. In service of our mission to remediate our students' language-based learning disabilities, we take every instructional moment seriously, and we work to be intentional in everything that we do. This podcast is an opportunity for Jamie Williamson, our head of school, to have an informal series of unscripted conversations with different members of our community about who they are, what they care about, and what the Windward School means to them. And so, we're putting our pencils down, we're closing up our computers, and we're looking forward to sharing with you another conversation today.
So first off, Jon, I just want to say thank you so much for being part of the Pencils Down podcast today. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun over the last few months to engage our community and have some really meaningful and deep conversations. And I think it's going to be a fun one today.
Thank you. I've enjoyed listening to the podcast and very excited to have the opportunity to be in the seat.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting. I think in the last several weeks, I think there's a lot more folks tuning in, so we've gotten some good feedback, and so it's just felt really nice to kind of get that. So I really appreciate it from all the listeners, and keep the feedback coming. So we always appreciate that. As we've done before, I'd love to start off with a little bit of what I'm calling almost like a full frontal gratitude assault here, right?
Okay, I'm ready.
Just laying it on you, because I do think that I hope that our folks listening have had a chance to interact and know you, but this is always hopefully a chance to kind of deepen that a little bit. You know, I think one of the things that, Jon, that has struck me about you since the moment I met you has been, the core level of kindness that you bring to a conversation. Like, you are so thoughtful around people. You are such a champion for others. You really work hard to lift up others' voices. In every conversation that happens kind of about you in this organization, I do think so many people recognize, like, if there's something going on in their lives, like, you check in, you reach out, you want to make sure people feel cared for. And I think that you do such a wonderfully beautiful job of that. I think we've seen it in the senior leadership and the academic team and the team leader meeting. You want people to feel seen and heard, and I think that's another thing that's always stood out to me about you. And just on a personal note, since I've arrived, it's like I just arrived, right? 6 years ago when I showed up here. It's been a minute. We've gone through some things together.
Yeah.
Navigated a pandemic and all that came with that, building this building. The transition, tons and tons of stuff. We've had just a lot of opportunity to partner together in that process. But you have really been so welcoming and so kind to me in my time here, and also to my family. And I just want to say a deep and sincere thank you. I can't, words don't kind of cover it, but you've really been such a great ally in all this work. So thank you.
Thank you. It was easy. I was actually just looking at videos on my phone last night, and I saw videos of our kids together bouncing on the trampoline in your backyard.
And you got two great kids, and I just was so glad that our kids were able to connect.
Yeah,
and I still can't believe one of your kids is 6'4" now. So it's just crazy.
I can't get my mind around it.
So as we think about, and you were so part of this process early on when I got here, the idea of defining our core values. I remember you and I talking about that at probably even before I started.
Yeah.
Kind of thinking through how we were going to do that. When I decided to introduce the book, Brene Brown book, Dare to Lead, again, you jumped right in that space. And I remember, talking through the plan to kind of really define our core values, and how I just really wanted to make sure that when I got here, I wasn't dictating values to the organization, that we were discovering the shared values of Windward. Mm-hmm. And I thought that process was such a fun one to kind of go through, that kind of qualitative researcher in me, able to kind of pull all that data, look at some themes, and work with you on sort of defining those themes and clarifying them. Yeah. And then helping that kind of guide our cultural blueprint that we created from that. So core values has been a conversation, both personally and professionally. It's been really important to me. And I would love if you could, and I hope you've taken a moment to kind of reflect on your own personal values. I'm pretty sure you have.
You've forced us to.
But I'd love if you could maybe talk about, from a value perspective, what are maybe your top two?
Yeah. First of all, I love the exercise of the two. I remember being a little bit it felt almost a little arbitrary. But when you explained it, and when Brene Brown explains it, it makes so much sense. First of all, love Brene Brown. I kind of avoided her for a while. My sister Lizzie is a big, big fan. So that when you pushed it, I was like, okay, there's something here. It always felt a little self-helpy to me. Uh-huh. But then when you get into her research and you get into just how rigorous her thinking is, I've been just a huge, huge fan. So, and I love the idea of the two, because everyone can come up with their first one.
Uh-huh.
That's sort of the easy one. I knew my first one right away. But the challenge of weeding out all the others and
Yeah.
deciding which is your second is really a counterintuitively challenging exercise. So my first one is integrity. I think those who knew me when I was earlier in my teaching, I was a little bit more of a black and white thinker. So they probably would not be surprised at all to have known it was integrity.
Yeah.
I think with my family, when we're playing games, I tend to be the one focused on the rules.
The rule master.
A little bit, I guess so. So again, I don't think integrity is any surprise to people. But for me, it's so much about feeling, you know how integrity is about wholeness.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people think just you go right to integrity is about truth telling. And I'm big on that. But it's also about being that person. And I know, you know, we have to be contextual.
Yeah.
And so the person I am right here, right now, with a camera going and the mic in front of my face might not be exactly the person I am when I'm, you know, venting with a friend or I'm at home on the weekend.
Yeah.
But that said, the line that I love so much from To Kill a Mockingbird is, when I used to teach it, is how Atticus Finch is the same man out on the street as he is in the home. And I've always seen that as not that you behave in exactly the same ways, but that you are fundamentally in your wholeness the same person in those places, and that you're not duplicitous. And I work really hard to be that way. I think there was a time in my life when I was younger and going through some challenges when I had to overcome some issues just when I was young, really young, like 9, 10 years old. And that work I did grounded me in how important it is to just try to work on knowing who I am and being that person. So it's a constant process. And I love the fact that I'm changing over time as well. But I'll just give you an example. Malcolm X is you know, when you do those stories about who's your favorite historical figure you'd want to have dinner with, for me, it's Malcolm X. And Malcolm X changed all through his life.
Yeah.
His name changed through his life. His attitude towards himself, his attitude towards politics, his attitude towards race changed completely. But there was always this deep integrity in him at every step of the way. So it doesn't preclude growth and change. But it just means in any given moment, being true to the people around you and to yourself.
Yeah. There's like an authentic sort of side of that, right? That sense, the deep sense of authenticity and the congruence between those spaces.
Absolutely. And it has nothing to do with being fixed and being unable to grow and change and evolve, but it is about in the moment having that kind of truth.
Yeah.
And then the second one that took me a while to come up with, I played with different words, and the word I finally landed on is compassion.
Yeah.
And one reason I chose compassion, I know you were going to challenge me on this, like why compassion and not kindness? I'm a big fan of the Tao Te Ching. It was a gift that my dad gave me many years ago, the Stephen Mitchell translation, which I highly recommend. And his translation, he talks about the three sort of treasures of Taoism is simplicity, patience, and compassion. And compassion has really resonated for me as my personal responsibility to be in alignment with people around me. That will often lead to kindness, right? But I can also have compassion for people on the other side of the world with whom I might never connect. But it's still my responsibility to exist in this world, I believe, in a compassionate way that connects me to what's going on with my feelings and in my heart, and not just be intellectual. I think the intellect I'm very fond of it. I love being logical and rational, but I also really love the being in tune with the feelings. And for me, compassion is about my responsibility to feel with other people. We can get into sympathy versus empathy. A lot of people say they don't like sympathy because sympathy is all about I feel so bad for you. Whereas empathy is I'm with you. But in fact, I'm actually a real big fan of an educational philosopher named Nell Noddings, who to me is like just one of the greatest. And she talks about melding sympathy and empathy together. That you have to really feel where that person is, but also feel with them. It's an incredible challenge. She also talks about the golden rule being about treat others as you want to be treated, but she twists it and says that's not actually the way to go. She says you have to treat others as they wish to be treated.
They wish to be treated.
As they wish to be treated. If I treated everyone the way I want to be treated, I might not be serving you well.
That's
right?
a great point.
Because I might say, well, I don't need that, but what I need to do is the challenge is in compassion is to try to understand where people are and what they need and give them what they need versus what I might need in that moment, which is, I think, a beautiful way of thinking about that golden rule with a kind of like extra, like golden rule, like 2.0.
Yeah. I like that.
Right?
I like that twist a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and I, as I'm listening to here, one, the integrity piece, I feel like I see that with you and in you so often. You're one of the biggest champions for academic integrity. We have that conversation frequently.
I like talking about it.
Yeah. It's a good one. I think back to your earlier teaching days, I think where that's kind of anchors a little bit.
Yeah.
But this idea of this authenticity and being congruent in that space and thinking about who you are, but also being open to change and growth. I think those things just ring true, and I think they're so supportive of our core values here. And then when I think about compassion, I love that word. I love that lens, and I do see that in you as well. And I think the way you frame that and the way you think about others in that process there are times where I see you like having this deep sense of empathy. I see you being alongside. I see you as really kind of making sure that you're with people who maybe wouldn't be in the room in a moment, or maybe on the other side of the world. And so I think those things all add to a real deep sense of, commitment to the work here, thinking about the kids, their struggle, and thinking about our teachers and the work that they do, and thinking about other departments. I see that just alive and well. So
And our families.
Right?
Whoa,
yeah, because
right.
you do spend a lot of time interacting and sort of supporting our families and through a lot of sometimes difficult moments and difficult challenges.
And I've been a family at Windward.
Yeah.
So
That's also another thing that I do. I love the perspective that you bring, and I've just watched you kind of, I think, blossom in that space of sharing your story, talking about Ian and the work, and your sort of, because you have, it seems to me, and I know you've said this before, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you talked about this kind of like educational epiphany, essentially. Like you are not the same educator that you were when you walked in here.
That's true.
Seems like Windward has like fundamentally changed how you think about education, how you think about kids, how you think about progress and growth.
Sort of a red pill experience.
Yeah.
Matrix. There's no going back. In some ways. I'm not saying I could never work in another school, but I have no interest in working in another school. But there's no going back in terms of what I've been exposed to about pedagogy, about teaching, about the kind of teaching that I did for 20 years in the mainstream. I look back at it with a lens now that I didn't have before, without a doubt.
And I so appreciate that reflective nature that you bring in that conversation. So, I will say, I do appreciate the, who would you in history would you have dinner with, and Malcolm X being a really great and his kind of growth. I'm actually surprised you didn't say James Baldwin. I'm going to say that because I know you're such a massive fan.
I am a big fan of Baldwin.
And you have you collect his books in such a beautiful way.
Yeah. My favorite book of Baldwin's, The Fire Next Time, is all about him being courted by the Nation of Islam and why he actually chose not to go with them, which I think is an absolutely extraordinary, very short book. Read it in a weekend. But there's something about Malcolm that really, really struck me.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And I'll just admit this, by the way. I remember being in college and going into somebody's room. You know how you put up posters, and this person had a Malcolm X poster up on her wall, and I just remember being, oh gosh. I was like, oh boy, this is not a place where I felt like I should be uncomfortable. And then when I read his autobiography, I was like, that was all me. And that was all what the society had put on me to think about him in a certain way. But there was an epiphany there too. And sometimes it's that sort of convert's passion that really drives you towards something. And so for me, Malcolm X is inextricable for me from my initial reaction of him as somebody who would have nothing to do with me. And then when I read his autobiography and I really understood him better, it changes everything.
Yeah. Sometimes a good autobiography will do that. You get a little bit different perspective, way deeper.
And it's just how he wants to see himself. It's not necessarily. So I've read biographies as well, and it's just it deepens and has drawn me even closer.
It is nice to compare and contrast those two things sometimes.
Totally, absolutely.
You carry, I think for folks listening, as we've, over the last few years, we've talked about the associate head role. You really work directly with our campus heads and our SEL work and making sure all that the trains keep moving, the teachers have the support that they need, the campus heads have the support that they need. And then Lisa on the other side of that has been like kind of the high level kind of curriculum focus, making sure that our academic programs are aligned with research and that we're kind of really knitting those things together really well.
Yeah.
But the two of you have a really interesting kind of symbiotic kind of partnership, right?
Well, yeah, we've been developing.
And it's continuing to evolve and grow. But in that work, you've been involved in a lot this year, a few things. So if you could, for those of you who may not be as intimately familiar with like, what are Jon's priorities this year? What is Jon really focusing on? Like, what are a couple of things that you're really, really working on right now?
So I want to answer that question in a really, I'll do a few specifics and then get a little more high level. So first of all, our SEL program, we don't, as you said, between Lisa and me, we don't separate these things entirely where we say she just does all the academics and Jon does the non-academics like SEL. But social emotional learning is academic in that we have classes where we teach our students, and that would fall under her domain. And so we're working closely in that way. But the social emotional learning is so critical for us to keep an eye on and to be thinking about how it is not something that we do in addition to our mission. Our mission is to remediate language-based learning disabilities. It cannot be done without being attentive to where our students are socially and emotionally every day. And I feel like it is, I'm positive. I know from the research and I know from my experience and that our attention to that program and to the way that we think about our students and their social emotional lives is critical, and how we help our families through that. These are really difficult times. So bringing Ruler to the school, which I know we'll be talking so much more about in the spring and in the coming years, I think it's going to be utterly transformative. And other ways in which we can help our students and our families feel close to the school, whether it's the after-school program that we started this year, whether it's our activities and clubs, even something like their disciplinary processes, right? Like I thought about like what I want to talk about disciplinary processes here with you. It's hardly a subject that people want to like be talking about because it's usually a lot of discomfort around it. But we believe at Windward that every disciplinary moment is a growth opportunity. And when we focus on it that way, I hope that it's okay to talk about it without people saying, why would anyone want to sit there and talk about punishing kids? Because that's not what it is at all. But I think it's critical that as we think about the community that we have, where our values lie, so much is found in how we deal with transgressions. What are transgressions?
Mm-hmm.
What are and when there are transgressions, how have we communicated with our community about them in advance so that people aren't surprised by what expectations are? And then when we help a child and a family through those moments of difficulty, because we're not all at our best in middle school. We're simply not. And part of that growth is going through those challenges. Part of growth in becoming a better math student or a better student of language arts is coming up against difficulties and maybe not passing a test. And how do you respond in that moment? Where's your resilience and where's the support around you? The same thing goes for behavior. Should have no tolerance for students being mean to each other, for students hurting each other, for students being unsafe with themselves and each other. There's no tolerance for that. But it's going to happen in this world. It's going to happen in schools, and it's all about how we respond to it. So helping our campus heads and our school nail down our language around discipline and around behavior and expectations, and how we support families through those moments in ways that make sense to them. And those can be some of the best ways that we connect with families, is how we help them through those difficult moments, rather than have the family be upset with the school with us. It's take those difficult moments and turn them into the growth and in a strengthening. Just the way, when a bone breaks and it heals, and sometimes with that, the way it heals can be even stronger. That's what I hope to happen when we go through those moments. But at the higher level, sometimes I look at people like, well, how was your day? Or what do you do as the associate head of school? And I think probably 80% of what I do is help people around the school communicate.
Mm-hmm.
The number of meetings that I'm in where either there was a failure of communication that we're sorting out, or we're looking ahead at a problem and saying, how are we going to communicate about this so that we avoid problems in the future? It is so much about communication. Whether it's in writing or it's verbally, whether it's an email or it's a policy. I think a big thing what I'm focused on is communication, and the other one is systems. Lucy Godman, our director of advancement, when she came in a few years ago, she was always talking about systems. And that gave a language to me that I actually hadn't used very much in my 30 plus year career about thinking of myself as a systems person. But she used that term, and it's really led me to believe in the importance of us coming up with systems that give us that. And what is a system but a way of communicating a procedure?
Yeah.
Or way, and so again, I think those align really well. But a lot of what I'm focused on in terms of there's communication, and then there's also building systems so that when we are hit by buses, or we move on, this school is in a strong place because the systems are in place.
Yeah.
That they're fair, that they're reasonable, that they're community building, and that they're to the good of the students and to the health of the school.
Because a couple things that I want to touch down on, and I do so appreciate, from a discipline's not the most fun thing to talk about, but one thing I've always loved about an LD school like ours is the focus on the idea that mistakes occur and learning should be occurring in response to that, right? I believe kids do well when they can, and I think that having that as a core belief is that a lot of this is skill, like kind of almost an absence of a skill in some cases. And whether that's behavioral or communication or interpersonal, I think our kids really need help with a lot of those skills. And when you come to the table thinking about it from how do I help a child, not just like slap a hand for what somebody did or didn't do, but how do I help them think about the skills? Because almost 22 years in education, I'd be really hard pressed to tell you a kid that I was like, this kid was just bad, right? It's almost a 99.9%. They didn't have the prerequisite skills to perform in a space that they got over their head in, right? Whether that's a social situation, a homework challenge. And so that's the way I love how we think about it from how can we learn and grow from this opportunity and how do we do things a little bit differently next time? So I really appreciate that work that you do in that. And I also think this idea of the systems, kind of building that institutional memory and also getting a little bit more efficient and effective in our work every year. If we have to solve the same problem over and over again, right. like let's put some really good effort into documenting and kind of creating that so that next year when we run into the same conversation, we say, what do we do when? Right. It frees up a little bit of, your time and resource to be able to start to say, now we can actually focus on the deeper conversations. Yeah,
exactly. That efficiency is a big part of it. Again, being a leader in a school and you talk efficiency, you sound like you're running some sort of factory, but that's not it at all.
That's not it. Yeah.
But if we can be more efficient, it allows us to turn our minds to ways to truly improve our students' experiences, our experiences as professionals, our families' experiences.
Yeah, and I do think, that is really, I think, one of the hallmarks of the work we do here. We see this idea of growth as, I think, top to bottom, right? Like as we're looking at our own individual work as leaders, like how do I show up every single day and be a little bit better today than I was yesterday? Yeah. Not from any sense of, kind of like I'm less than, but like in a sense that I'm here to serve and I want to be the best I can be for my community. To the idea that, our kids are showing up and they're being so, I think, incredibly brave and courageous, showing up in a space where they're working on some of the things that are the absolute hardest for them. And I think it's easy to have a lot of empathy when you're having a kid who's challenged with reading or math or writing. We can see the skill absence there. Yeah. But sometimes on the behavior side of things, it's so hard to kind of maintain that mindset to say, oh, this kid's just being, versus, oh my gosh, like I bet this child doesn't have the social skills to navigate this, or their processing's a little bit slow and the communication's happening so fast that they get stuck. Yeah. Or having just a little bit more generous kind of approach to how we're thinking about that.
Yeah, you think about what their day, like that child who's struggling, the child who, there are kids who walk in the room and they're like, how are you, Mr. So-and-so? How's your day? And you're like, I love this kid. It's great to be here. He's answering all his questions. He does his homework.
It's easy to love.
It's easy to love. He's getting they're getting all the love every day. And then you have the child who's struggling and they're going throughout their day without getting that. And so what we have to work with our teachers on is with ourselves is that's our challenge. That's the kid who's going to push us. And that's a kid that's going to really challenge us to say, how do I get through?
Yeah.
And it's not easy. And I cannot say that I always did it in my career.
Mm-hmm.
There were students that I had in my, classes that I just couldn't connect with. And those are failures.
Yeah.
Those are truly failures. But our job is to look at those students who need it and find ways of giving to them. And I couldn't agree with you more about it. It's very skill oriented. It's also contextual. Forgive me. We probably have some people listening who watch the television show Severance. Do you watch Severance?
I've seen
We have
first season.
Severance.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I just finished the first season.
Yeah.
But what you find in Severance is there's this character who you have all this empathy with, and she seems like a really nice, good person.
Mm-hmm.
And then she finds out that she's actually in this alter ego, this other part of her is actually like an evil person.
Mm-hmm.
And when I turned to my daughter Annie as we were watching, I was like, do you get what's going on here? This show just exposed that decontextualized from her life, of her parents and of the world that she was growing up in, totally decontextualized. This is a good person. Mm-hmm. And when she saw herself in her life contextualized in all the stuff that had been put upon her, she was actually kind of a twisted, sick person. Mm-hmm. And that twisted sickness had partially maybe to do with herself and what she brought to it, but also context.
Yeah.
And that decontextualized, she was actually a decent person who wanted like all things that we could all empathize with. And I thought the show was fascinating existentially on that and psychologically on that. So again, sorry to talk about Severance, but thinking about our kids, we have to think about them in terms of their learning disabilities. What have they experienced in schools before Windward? What's going on at home?
Yeah.
What have kids been, how are they being treated by kids at Windward? By what happened on the bus on the way to school? All that has an impact on them every day.
And, I think this idea of making sure that we're paying attention to the kids who are a little bit harder in those spaces, right? I remember when I was in public school, I had a split role. So I was the school psychologist for a middle school, and I had to do the sixth grade. To keep me in one building, they gave me a little extra stuff to do as well. So I was a sixth grade counselor as well. So I had to do all the scheduling for that. And I remember one year we had a couple kids that kept coming up in the conversation. So I went to the teacher's lounge, or by the mailboxes actually, and I put up this chart. And I said, all the sixth grade teachers, anybody who interacts with the sixth grade, I want you to put a little initial by a kid if you feel like you have a personal relationship with this child.
Yeah, it's a great exercise.
And so then, with 2 weeks, people came in, they would initial, and all of a sudden I saw where the holes were.
And the holes are big.
And the holes were big, and so those were my kids. Those were the kids that I just made beelines for how do I pull them into the conversation a little bit more openly? And it was actually a really eye-opening conversation, because there are so many kids that some adults can just really miss, because there's a whole stack of kids who will endear themselves to you out of the gate. Yeah. And so I really appreciate that perspective on that. Yeah. And I also know that in your role, while you work with campus heads and assistant campus heads sometimes in some of these more challenging conversations, and with families sometimes who are either having a moment where we have to work with them to kind of provide some clarity or some support through something challenging. So that work can get heavy. And so when I think about how important it is for us as the adults in the system here to be available, and you talked about this earlier in terms of the SEL, that emotional availability for people, right? You got to take care of the emotional side of this. So as you think about your work and the stresses there, that are implicit in that, how do you, Jon, take care of yourself and really show up and so that way you're the best you can be?
Well, first of all, this is such a sort of non-answer, but one thing that helps me a lot at work is feeling that I'm prepared and that I'm getting the job done. Yeah, I can give. I'm very fortunate, I guess, in that I don't need night to night a lot of sleep. I mean, I got to catch up eventually, but I would much rather come into school with very, very little sleep and have that project done. Yeah. On time, and I come to a meeting where everyone was counting on something and I had it done, then get 8-9 hours of sleep and be sorry, I didn't get it done. I might have needed the sleep, but it matters so much to me when I come into work to be responsible. Mm-hmm. And I still have nightmares as a teacher about walking into a classroom unprepared. Oh yeah. Oh my God, walking in a room and I don't know what the assignment is, and teaching is rough. But in terms of real self-care, number one, I've started exercise again, which is great. I've working with a trainer on Zoom, on FaceTime twice a week, and that's
great.
been wonderful to see my strength building back again. Oh my God, I'm turning 50. I'm turning 55 next month, in May, and not next month, but in May, and I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
And so this working out has been great to feel a little bit more like okay with my body again, because I was feeling weak.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
You know, we've had some conversations at the senior leadership and some of the stuff we do in the summer to kind of get ourselves organized for the next year. Yeah. And one of the things that we've talked about a lot is sometimes when we go on these little mini retreats, we do some physical activity. Yeah. Much to some folks, chagrin, right?
We all come at it in different places. Yeah.
And my sort of perspective on this has always been the idea that you have to have some endurance in this work.
Yeah,
like,
it helps.
I even hate to put a number of hours on it, because like there's weeks where I know the two of us are going like, it's like 2 full-time jobs, right? In one human being. And there's times when you're just like, you get on a Sunday afternoon and I'm exhausted. Yeah. The last thing I want to do is do anything to deplete myself physically anymore. Yeah. But like taking care of that physical stuff actually oddly enough, it puts more gas in my tank.
Yeah. And a lot of that depletion is decision depletion, right? The mental depletion. And for somebody in your role to be making decisions all the time, people are coming to you all the time. And you have to think through, just sitting in your chair can be exhausting.
And then you get a Friday night and you're like, where do you want to go to dinner? And you're like,
please, can't even think of it.
And so I really appreciate it, because I do think the physical exercise of that is such an important piece. And as we get a little bit more mature in our age, and I'm putting myself certainly squarely in that category, because there's moments where in the last couple of years where I'm like, wow, that's hurting. And I don't know why that hurts.
That's right. So look, a couple of other self-care things I'll note is, at home we have a golden retriever. He's 6 months old. We have another dog who's about 11. And that just coming home to 2 dogs and the excitement they have is just really, really sweet. And so that's, something I really look forward to every night is coming in the door. I love sleeping on a bed with 2 dogs as well. Fortunately, I have a wife who is currently okay with it. I think that's a wonderful part of being at home. Obviously, my kids and family, really, really important to me. The last thing I'd note in terms of self-care, if anyone walks by my office over here, you were so good to say, get Jon some bookshelves. And I really appreciated that. And so did my family, because I was able to get a lot of books out of the house. I love having books around me. I don't have enough time to read as much as I'd like, but my daughter and a couple of friends of hers in high school wanted to start a book club. So we are starting a book club. And my daughter and a couple of her friends.
I love that. Now, is it books from your shelf?
It is. Well, of course. But
okay, great.
I put out a whole bunch of books, and we just decided last night we're going to start with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I used to teach.
Great book, yeah.
It's absolutely amazing, deeply misogynistic, problematic book. But I love teaching kids how a book can be misogynistic, not just like characters, but the book itself is problematic. But it's an amazing, amazing book. So I'm going to get a lot of self-care out of reading literature again and doing that with my daughter and her friends is going to be a lot of fun.
And I do love that about you, because like your passion for literature and reading and that debate and that discussion, it's infectious.
It's fun.
And I remember, what was Isaac reading? And you wanted to talk to him about it. You were so excited.
Catcher in the Rye.
Catcher in the Rye.
Oh,
that's
God.
right.
Teaching Catcher is
and like I remember you guys had some conversations and maybe like checked in on Zoom or on a phone call a couple times. So
I miss teaching a lot. I don't miss the correcting. Let me be honest. And I love what I do.
Yeah.
I love this work. I love supporting teachers. I love seeing the impact that we have on students at Windward. The teaching literature in the classroom was a really fun part of my career. And I'm excited to just have some taste of it with Annie and her friends.
Yeah. Now, did you end up getting through Infinite Jest last year, or did you give up?
No, hold on a minute. I was on board for Infinite Jest.
You were
completely on board. I even started doing. I was ready to go.
You had like 4 workbooks.
That's right, and websites open. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do that by myself. As soon as we were ready to get a book club, a real commitment from some people here at Windward, I'm 100% on board. So no, I didn't finish it. I've read half of Infinite Jest. This isn't the place to talk about not finishing it. It's something that I will do.
Yeah.
I
So
got to finish climbing.
which you did inspire me, because I'd started this
You
book
read it,
years
you
ago,
finished
and
it.
I forced myself to get, and actually, like, I would say in the end, like, I had some real insight from this book.
Yeah.
Like I saw what you saw in it. But it took me a minute to get there. It was,
Yeah.
it was definitely like, it was a lot.
And a book like that deserves multiple reads in the end anyway.
Yeah.
A masterpiece is something that you can come back to and back to. And there's this great quote, I can't do it correctly, but the masterpiece is different every time you read it, because you're different every time you read it.
Oh, I love that.
Right?
I
You
love
learn
that.
more about it, but you're
Yeah.
also in a different place. And if it's truly a masterpiece, it yields.
Yeah.
And that's why teaching English for me worked, because I was teaching books I had taught year after year after year after
Yeah.
year, over and over again. Never got tired of it, because you're just dealing with texts that are so rich.
Yeah. The book you referenced earlier with Atticus Finch, like that is like, talk about like such a beautiful book.
I didn't read it until an adult.
Really?
Until I was an adult. And when I finally read it, I was like, my life has been lessened, because
Yeah.
I didn't have that in middle school.
Yeah.
Totally. What a
Yeah.
great book.
I've read To Kill a Mockingbird probably 4 times.
Oh my.
But I'm also, there's a few that I've kind of been inspired to go back. The Great Gatsby is another one. Every time I read that book, I'm just like, wow.
Gatsby. I do want to say about, though, for anyone listening, I know that To Kill a Mockingbird has some challenges with it.
It does.
There's been a lot of criticisms of it. Same thing with Gatsby as well. I don't think that ruins a book. It just deepens it. And it's and the critical thing when you're teaching it is to make sure your students understand that as much as we're drawn to it, we have to like recognize that there could be matters that maybe in a different day and age we look at differently. As I mentioned, even Cuckoo's Nest. I love teaching my students. I had this room full of kids that just love McMurphy. They just love him as a character. And then to expose to them, he is really a problematic character. Yeah. He has some real misogyny going on there. And for them to realize, wow, I could be bought into that worldview, and then realize that I can challenge it.
Yeah.
And that's why for me, reading literature with kids is so great, because it's existential, it's personal, it changes their lives. It is.
Yeah.
I would always argue that literature is the prime virtue.
Well, I love how the end of this podcast has turned into, John's literature corner here.
there.
Yeah, I do it, which I so appreciate.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure today, John. I know we chat a lot, but I really enjoyed this time together, and I hope our listeners for Pencils Down have done the same. So, again, thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful spring break with your family. Thanks.
You too.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay.